Sir Richard Francis Burton, a 19th century British explorer, soldier and spy, not only managed to learn 26 languages, but he was able to master them. During his lifetime, he translated several books of different languages, including Portuguese, Arabic, and Sanskrit. Richard was an autodidact who despised language classes. He attributed his success to the method he invented. First, he would equip himself with the basics by memorizing essential vocabulary and studying basic grammar rules. Not everything, just what he predicts to be relevant and essential. After that, he would read something easy, interesting, and familiar to him, to again big vocabulary that he liked and analyze the grammar as he read. He would then review the vocabulary in his spare time. By doing so, he breaks quote-unquote the neck of the language. This is how he prepared himself for the outer world. After the neck of the language was broken, he would attempt to talk with native speakers and imitate their pronunciation. Finding native speakers to talk with was not a problem for him, as he was a traveler and an explorer. Kenneth Hale, a polyglot, used a similar method. He learned about 50 languages. Some of them were rare and only were spoken by Native Americans and Native Australians, and they had no written systems, no grammar textbooks, and no resources to study from. Hale, like Sir Richard, despised language classes. He said, quote, "For me, it's got to be done with another person on a one-to-one basis. I start with parts of the body and common animals and objects. I learn nouns, then I pick up the sound system. I write that down." End quote. While these two cases might seem extreme, they demonstrate how far the human capacity for language learning can reach. For most people, it seems that there is a critical period, a deadline to acquire a language easily and effortlessly. It seems that after childhood, it's nearly impossible to master a language. The literature is mixed about this hypothesis, and there are many individual cases which indicate otherwise.
But learning a second language is not exactly like learning the first one. The student cannot depend, as the child does, on games and chance experiences to teach him.
I don't know where the telephone is.
I don't know where is the telephone.
He must learn economically and effectively.
Humans are hardwired to acquire languages. Hypothetically, our brain is designed with a special faculty that can pick language from the environment, process it, and learn the patterns of the grammar subconsciously. A faculty known as Chomsky's language acquisition device.
Is that most people probably aren't actually taught language at all, yet the children nevertheless learn.
Well, I would want to even go beyond that. I think it's certainly the case that language is, in only the most marginal sense, is taught, and that teaching is in no sense essential to the acquisition of language. But in a certain sense, I think we might even go on to say that language isn't even learned. It seems to me if we want a reasonable metaphor, we should talk about growth. Language seems to me to grow in the mind, rather in the way that familiar physical systems of the body grow.
In his book, The Language Instinct, Steven Pinker says, humans are so innately hardwired for language that they can no more suppress their ability to learn and use language than they can suppress the instinct to pull a hand back from a hot surface.
Any child can learn any number of languages at this time if people just simply keep using the same language to them consistently. If mama and daddy speak English and the nurse speaks Chinese and the kids he plays with speak Spanish, you'll learn all three of those languages and keep them all apart with no difficulty during this learning period. The child can learn many languages if he is presented with them in consistent experience and interaction situation, and any adult can learn any number of languages if he wants.
Warum lernen Sie Deutsch?
According to Corder, a child acquires a language due to innate or rewired motivation. Given motivation, he said, it's inevitable that a human being will learn a second language if he is exposed to the language data.
Everyone can pick up language subconsciously. Children acquire their first languages. Children acquire second languages. Adults acquire language. The ability to subconsciously pick up language does not disappear when you enter school. It does not disappear when you become a teenager. It doesn't disappear when you get older. It's with us forever. We think the language acquisition device never shuts off.
Stephen Krashen, a famous linguist, differentiated between learning a language and acquiring a language. Learning is a conscious process of studying grammar rules and memorizing vocabulary first to build sentences. This is what's done in most language learning classes. It's known as the skill-building hypothesis.
English public schools, for example, we learn that A noun is the name of a person, place, thing, or idea. We learn that the subject and the verb are supposed to agree. This is conscious language learning.
Rules of grammar.
The problem with learning grammar is that it's mostly incomplete, because it's mostly unconscious. Native speakers can sometimes sense that something is wrong, yet not be able to explain why.
The actual rules of language, which certainly are not taught in school, because in fact nobody even knows them to this day, are totally unconscious. And furthermore, even if you wanted to teach somebody the rules of language, you wouldn't be able to do it because the rules are largely unknown. We're just barely beginning to discover them. It seems to us that there's no problem in speaking, just as it seems to us that there's no problem in, let's say, walking.
Now, when you hear someone make a mistake in your own language, very rarely can you tell exactly what rule was broken. That feeling for correctness, that feeling for language, is what we call language acquisition.
Sir Richard learned grammar on the go as he read, and he would only spend less than 15 minutes per day to memorize vocabulary. Learning grammar can be helpful to maintain accuracy, but Krashen argues that it's a suboptimal means to pick a new language.
Language acquisition does not happen by learning grammar rules, by memorizing vocabulary lists.
Instead, he proposed comprehensible input as a better option. The input hypothesis says that a language can be acquired when an input of a meaningful message is understood. Such input is known as the comprehensible input.
You're reading a book, you're listening to a conversation, you're listening to a presentation, but without realizing it at the same time, you might be acquiring.
Even half listening to any language, I became fluent.
By consuming input in the target language that is interesting, meaningful, and a bit beyond our current understanding, an input that is fairly easy to understand, our brain will fill in the gaps for us, and will infer meaning and grammar rules from the context itself, despite not understanding all the words and structures in it.
When people speak to us in another language, and we understand what they say, or we read something in another language and we understand the message, language acquisition will take place. Language acquisition takes place necessarily. It's unavoidable.
Mein Name ist Emma und das ist meine Tante.
Deine Mama.
Nein, Lisa ist doch nicht meine Mama. Sie ist meine Tante. Meine Mama fliegt nach Amerika. Sie arbeitet da. Bitte.
Danke.
By mere exposure to a massive amount of comprehensible input, and despite not understanding all the words and structures in it, your brain will subconsciously acquire the language day by day, and you won't probably feel it. This hypothesis explains how Sir Richard utilized familiar books to level up, how Kenneth inferred meaning from simple contextualized interaction with the natives without relying on any other resource.
What did grammar have to do?
Absolutely nothing.
The bottom line is, to pick a language, you can get away with learning grammar. It's helpful, and you can do it if you want to, but it's not sufficient to pick a new language. Instead, get immersed in an environment where a comprehensible input can be easily accessed. An input that is not too easy, but also not too hard. Watch movies and turn on the subtitles if you don't have the privilege to travel. Read books, listen to podcasts, audiobooks, and audio dramas. Find someone to practice with. Write your diaries in the target language. Translate Wikipedia articles and YouTube videos. But most importantly, derive your input from interesting and familiar topics to increase comprehension. In fact, a 2007 study showed that Spanish learners who possessed background knowledge about a topic had a better reading comprehension compared to those who didn't. For example, it wasn't hard for me to understand a German audio drama based on Orwell's 1984 because I was already acquainted with the plot. I was familiar with the plot. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. See you guys in the next video.